The valley floor was nothing but cracked mud and exposed roots where the lake had once been. Emperor Vespasian stood on the ridge, his boots sinking into the dry silt. He did not look at the horizon. He looked at the emptiness beneath his feet. Beside him, the lead architects waited, their scrolls tucked tight against their sides. Vespasian raised his arm, his finger tracing a massive, jagged circle in the air. The silence of the drained basin was absolute, save for the dry whistle of wind across the clay. He spoke, and his voice carried no doubt. He demanded a structure that would anchor his name to the earth long after his breath failed. He wanted a monument that would swallow the memory of the past. The architects stared at the mud, then back at the emperor, realizing the scale of the task. The ground they stood on would soon be the foundation for an empire of stone. Vespasian turned his back on the lake bed, his gaze fixed on the distance, already seeing the arches that did not yet exist. The command was absolute. The transformation of the valley began with that single sweeping gesture. The silence of the basin died within the week. Thousands of laborers arrived, their movements a synchronized swarm across the valley floor. They hauled massive blocks of travertine, the stone grating against stone with a sound like grinding teeth. Each block was pulled into place by ropes that groaned under the immense tension. Deep within the site, the air turned thick with the smell of lime and burning heat. They mixed volcanic ash with water and stone, a chemical reaction that turned the mixture into a slurry that hardened into rock. It was a relentless, grinding industry. Day after day, the dust rose in thick, choking clouds that obscured the sun. From the chaos of the mud, a skeleton of 80 arches began to emerge. Each arch was a testament to the sheer weight of human labor, rising higher with every passing season. The structure cast a long, jagged shadow across the valley, growing with a terrifying, mechanical precision. The arches stood as a skeletal cage, locking the earth in place. What had been a sunken grave for a lake was now a mountain of stone, forged by thousands of hands, working in total, brutal unison. The last timber scaffolding collapsed, leaving only the polished, white curve of the finished arena. The dust settled, revealing a perfect circle of travertine rising against the sky. Then, the gates swung open. 50,000 citizens surged forward, a tide of humanity pouring through the arched entrances like water through a broken dam. They climbed the steep stone stairs, their sandals clattering against the rock, until every tiered seat was filled. The air grew thick, with the sound of thousands of voices merging into a single rhythmic hum. High above the chaos, Emperor Vespasian sat upon his dais. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the cool, carved stone of the balustrade. He watched the massive crowd shift and pulse, a sea of movement governed by his decree. The city had arrived, hungry for the spectacle that was about to unfold. He felt the vibration of their excitement travel through the floorboards and into his own bones. The arena was finally alive. The promise of the monument had been kept, and in the collective roar of the people below, Vespasian heard the heartbeat of his empire. He held his breath, waiting for the first signal to tear through the anticipation. Far beneath the cheering thousands, the light vanished. Gladiators stood in a narrow corridor of damp, sweating stone. The air here was heavy with the stench of salt, straw, and caged animal breath. He gripped his weapon, the metal slick with his own sweat. Somewhere in the darkness, a lion let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards and up into his boots. Suddenly, the chains above him shrieked. Iron pulleys groaned as they began to turn, a deep, grinding sound that echoed off the tunnel walls. The entire floor shuddered under his feet, sending dust raining down from the ceiling. He braced himself against a damp wall, his knuckles white as he tightened his grip. The rhythmic thud of the wooden elevators moving into place grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat, counting down the seconds to his death. He could hear the slaves shouting, their voices muffled by the stone, as they hauled the cages toward the trapdoors. The ground rocked violently again. He felt the structure strain, the massive weight of the amphitheater pressing down from above. He looked up at the dark underside of the stage, waiting for the first crack of light to break the suffocating blackness. The heavy timber platform jerked, then surged upward. Gladiator held his breath as the ceiling vanished, replaced by a searing, white-hot glare that seared his eyes. He stumbled forward, As the elevator locked into place with a bone-jarring thud, the world exploded. A wall of sound crashed down from the tiered stone, a deafening roar of 50,000 throats that made the very air vibrate. He squeezed his eyes shut for a heartbeat, then forced them open. The arena was a vast, blinding bowl of sand and heat. Dust danced in the shafts of sunlight, swirling around his boots. He took a heavy, deliberate step onto the shifting grit. His knuckles were locked tight around the hilt of his blade, his pulse hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready for the strike. He did not look at the crowd, though he felt their collective hunger pressing down on him. He focused only on the horizon of the sand, where the heat shimmered. He planted his feet, tested the stability of the ground, and waited. The trapdoor groaned behind him, sealing his path back to the dark. He stood alone, his breath ragged, the cold steel of his weapon the only solid thing in a world of noise and light. The opponent lunged. Gladiator sidestepped, his blade humming as it cut through the air. Steel met steel with a sharp, piercing ring that cut through the thunderous chanting of the masses. He pushed forward, driving his shoulder into the other fighter, forcing him back toward the center of the arena. They circled, boots kicking up clouds of sand that choked the air. Every strike was calculated, a brutal exchange of force and momentum. Gladiator parried a downward blow, the impact jarring his arm, and countered with a swift horizontal slash. The opponent ducked, the blade whistling inches above his head. They locked weapons, gritting their teeth as they leaned into the pressure, forearms trembling with the strain. The roar from the tiers grew frantic, a rhythmic, bloodthirsty pulse that mirrored the rhythm of their clashing steel. Gladiator shoved his opponent away, regained his stance, and lunged again. The air was thick with heat and the copper tang of exertion. Neither man yielded. Every move was a desperate calculation, a fight for every inch of sand. As they traded blows, the crowd rose to its feet, their collective scream vibrating through the very ground beneath the fighters' feet. The sand beneath them shifted. A deep, grinding vibration surged up through their boots, silencing the duel instantly. Both fighters froze as the center of the arena floor groaned and began to drop. Then, the water came. A torrent erupted from hidden conduits, foaming and churning as it flooded the basin. The tide rose with terrifying speed, swirling around their ankles, then their knees. Gladiator stumbled, his balance compromised by the sudden surge of cold, muddy water. The opponent struggled to regain footing, but the current was relentless. From the dark tunnels beneath the perimeter, massive wooden prows broke the surface. Ships, rigged with tight ropes and heavy timber, scraped into the arena. They drifted into the widening pool, bumping against the stone walls with bone-shaking force. The arena was no longer a stage for a duel. It was a churning, aquatic battlefield. Gladiator waded through the waist-deep water, his blade held high to keep it dry. The ships accelerated, oars churning the froth as they turned. The crowd erupted into a new, higher pitch of frenzy. The water surged against the lower tiers, cold and heavy, as the deck of a galley swung toward the center, closing the distance with lethal intent. High above the surging basin, Emperor Vespasian gripped the stone railing. He scanned the swirling water, watching as the wooden galleys locked together in a violent, splintering collision. The sound of rending timber echoed against the travertine walls, a brutal symphony that triggered a deafening response from the 50,000 spectators. Below, the water churned with the wake of the ships. Gladiator moved with calculated precision, leaping from the flooded deck of a sinking galley onto the rising prow of an approaching vessel. He stood firm as the ships bucked under the weight of the tide. With a final, decisive strike, he disarmed his last opponent, sending the blade spiraling into the dark water. The arena became a stage of absolute dominance. Gladiator raised his weapon toward the upper tiers, his chest heaving, water cascading from his limbs. He was the living embodiment of the spectacle, a singular point of focus amidst the engineered chaos. Emperor Vespasian leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the victor. He did not cheer, but he gave a sharp, singular nod of approval. The empire looked down upon its own reflection in the blood-stained water, and for this moment, the grandeur of Rome felt as immovable as the stone itself. The echoes of the roar faded into the silence of centuries. Rome fractured, its borders pulled thin by time and strife. The earth itself turned against the monument. A series of violent tremors ripped through the outer walls, sending massive blocks of travertine tumbling into the dust. The structural rhythm of the arches broke, leaving jagged. There was now only a quarry for the desperate. Scavengers arrived with iron bars and ropes, prying the stone from the tiers to build villas in the ruins. They stripped the marble, dismantled the seats, and carried away the history of the arena piece by piece. The intricate system of elevators and trapdoors rusted into useless iron. The grand stage became a basin for dead leaves and wind-blown silt. Slowly, the arena floor settled into the uneven earth. The heavy, resonant silence of the structure was broken only by the thin, haunting whistle of the wind as it surged through the broken arches. The grandeur had been hollowed out, leaving behind a skeleton of gray stone that stood exposed to the indifferent sky. The cycle of power had closed, leaving the amphitheater to wither in the quiet wake of a fallen age. Today, a lone traveler drifts through the archways, her footsteps muffled by the dust of 2 millennia. She runs a palm over the pitted, weathered concrete of the lower tiers, feeling the cold, granular history beneath her skin. Above, the jagged rim of the amphitheater cuts a sharp, broken line against the blue of a modern sky. Surrounding the ruin, the glass and steel of the city hum with the frantic energy of a new world, yet the Colosseum demands a different tempo. It stands as a hollow shell, a silent witness to the vanity of empires that once claimed the horizon. The massive blocks, once hauled by thousands to cement a dynasty, now serve only to frame the emptiness. There is no roar here, only the weight of stone and the slow, inevitable erosion of legacy. Power, in all its arrogance, leaves behind these monuments to its own disappearance. The traveler looks up at the soaring, skeletal arches and understands the truth of the ruin. Every foundation eventually returns to the earth, leaving only the shadow of what was once thought to be eternal. The stone remains, but the ambition has long since dissolved into the wind, proving that even the greatest empires are merely brief interruptions in the long, quiet march of time.